I had already called the attorney. I had already changed the password on the joint account. What I hadn't done yet was decide what to wear to my own anniversary dinner. That sounds absurd now. I know it does. But that's where my head was on the morning of October 14th. Standing in front of my closet at 6:50 in the morning, staring at a row of dresses I'd worn to events where I smiled at the right moments and said the right things, and never once let anyone see what I was carrying underneath all of it. I picked the navy one, the one Fletcher always said made me look like I was going to a funeral. He didn't know how right he was. We had been married for 11 years. 11 years of holidays at his mother Harriet's house in Savannah. 11 years of splitting the electric bill and arguing about whose turn it was to call the plumber. 11 years of building something together that I had genuinely believed in for most of it. Fletcher was a financial consultant. He wore good suits. He remembered the names of waitstaff and tipped well and said all the right things in public. At dinner parties, our friends would squeeze my arm and whisper that I'd done well for myself. I used to believe them. I work in forensic accounting. I have for 14 years. I find the money people try to hide. I follow paper trails through shell companies and offshore accounts and LLCs registered to addresses that don't exist. I do it for a living 40 hours a week, sometimes 60. It is not glamorous work, but it is precise work, and once you've trained yourself to see the gaps between what the numbers say and what actually happened, you cannot unknow that skill. It lives in you permanently. That's the thing Fletcher never fully understood about me. He thought he'd married a woman who balanced the household budget and nodded along at dinner parties and was impressed by his work because she didn't fully understand it. He had constructed a version of me in his mind. Pleasant, capable in a domestic way, not quite sharp enough to look too closely at things. He was wrong about that from the beginning. He just didn't find out until October 14th. I should start earlier. That's fair. The beginning of this story isn't the dinner. The dinner is just where everything landed. The beginning is a Tuesday in late March when I was homesick with a sinus infection and too foggy to go into the office. Fletcher had already left for work. I was on the couch with tea and a heating pad when I got up to find my phone charger and walked past his home office. He'd left the filing cabinet open. He never left the filing cabinet open. I stood in the hallway for a moment. I want to be honest with you. There was a part of me that almost kept walking, the part that had spent 11 years choosing comfort over clarity. But I had trained myself out of that habit professionally, and some habits don't stay in one room of your life. They follow you down the hallway. I went in. The folder on top was labeled with the name of a company I didn't recognize, Harwick Crest Holdings, LLC. I had never heard Fletcher mention it. I knew every investment he'd disclosed to me, every business contact, every account we held together. This name wasn't in any of it. I took out my phone. I photographed every page in that folder. Then I put it back exactly as I found it, closed the cabinet, and went back to the couch. I didn't say anything to Fletcher that night, or the night after. I went into the office on Thursday, even though my sinuses still felt like wet cement, because I needed access to certain databases I couldn't reach from home, and I needed to do it quietly and without any record of what I was looking for appearing on our shared internet connection. What I found over the next 3 weeks rearranged yet everything. Harwick Crest Holdings had been incorporated 18 months earlier in Delaware. The registered agent was a service out of Wilmington, the kind companies use when they don't want a real address attached to the filing. The sole member listed was a name I didn't know, a man named Philip Renard, but Philip Renard's contact address was a P.O. box in our zip code. And when I cross-referenced the company's banking activity through channels I have access to professionally, the funds flowing in and out of that account traced back, through 2 intermediary transfers to a brokerage account in Fletcher's name. He had built a holding company. He had been routing money into it for a year and a half. Our money, assets from our joint investment portfolio, a property we owned in the Carolinas that I thought we still held together. I checked the deed. It had been transferred to Harwick Crest Holdings 11 months ago. Fletcher had signed it. My signature was not on it because my name wasn't on the deed, which I had not known because Fletcher had handled that closing while I was traveling for work and I had trusted him. That was the word. Trusted. I sat with what I knew for 2 weeks before I called anyone. I needed to be certain. I needed every thread pulled before I made a single move, because I had seen enough cases in my career to know that the worst thing you can do is tip your hand before you have the full picture. So I kept going to work. I kept cooking dinner on the nights we were both home. I kept asking about his week and laughing at the things that were supposed to be funny, and acting like a woman who had no idea what was happening in her own house. That is one of the harder things I've ever done. I want to say that plainly. I am not someone who compartmentalizes easily. I feel things deeply, and I process them loudly, usually to my best friend, Constance, who has been listening to me work through problems since we were 23 years old and sharing a 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta. I called Constance from a parking garage near my office on a Tuesday afternoon and told her what I'd found. I cried once for about 4 minutes, while she said nothing because she knew I needed the 4 minutes. Then I stopped, and she said, "Tell me everything from the beginning," and I did. "What do you need?" she asked when I was done. "I need a very specific kind of attorney," I said. She had one. Of course she did. Constance knows someone for everything. Her name was Patricia Holm. She had been practicing family law and asset litigation in Georgia for 22 years. When I sat across from her in her office on a Thursday morning with a folder of 67 printed pages and a flash drive with 340 photographs on it, she looked at the documents for a long time without speaking. Then she looked up at me and said, "How long have you known?" "About what he did 5 weeks," I said. "About what kind of man he is longer." She nodded once like that answer told her something. Then she told me what our options were. What I learned in Patricia's office is that the transfer of the Carolina property had been done without my proper legal consent. My name had never appeared on the original deed because of a paperwork error at closing that Fletcher had known about and never corrected, and which he had almost certainly exploited intentionally. That was actionable. The routing of marital assets through a private LLC was also actionable. Patricia said we were in a strong position. She said words like dissipation and fraudulent conveyance that I already knew the definitions of, and for the first time I felt something that wasn't grief or rage, or the low, heavy hum of betrayal. I felt clear. That clarity did something to me. It reorganized my posture. I drove home that evening, and I made dinner, and I told Fletcher that Constance had invited us to her house for dinner at the end of the month, and that she wanted to make it a little celebration for our anniversary. Fletcher said that sounded nice. He smiled, the way he smiled when something was convenient for him. I smiled back. He hadn't mentioned the anniversary himself. Not once. Not a card, not a reservation, not a word. I already knew why. I just needed to watch him not remember. The invitation from Constance's house was real, but I had asked her to frame it as a dinner for the 2 of us. Something intimate, nothing formal. What Fletcher did not know was that it wasn't going to be just Constance. It was going to be Patricia Holm. It was going to be my cousin Nadira, who is a CPA and had helped me verify certain tax filings over the past 3 weeks. It was going to be Constance's husband, Raymond, who is large and calm, and whose presence in a room changes the temperature of it in a way that I found comforting. And it was going to be a notary, because there was a document that needed to be signed that evening by both parties under witness. What Fletcher believed he was walking into was an anniversary dinner at his wife's best friend's house. What he was actually walking into was the end of every plan he had made without me. The night of October 14th, I got dressed in the navy dress, and I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. I thought about the version of me who had stood in that filing cabinet doorway in March and almost kept walking. I thought about all the ways I had trained myself to be quiet in my own house, to smooth things over, to choose peace over truth, because peace was easier to maintain in the short term. I thought about how long I had let someone else's version of me become the one I moved through the world in. Then I picked up my bag, walked downstairs, and got in the car. Fletcher was already there when I arrived. He'd ridden with Constance's neighbor. Constance had told him she wanted to surprise me, that he should arrive early and pretend it was a regular dinner until I got there. He was standing in the living room with a glass of red wine, comfortable, relaxed, wearing the charcoal blazer I had bought him 2 birthdays ago. He looked at me when I walked in and said, "There she is. Not happy anniversary, not you look beautiful. Just there she is, the way you'd say it about a coworker who finally made it to the office Christmas party." I smiled and kissed him on the cheek and said, "Here I am." Constance came in from the kitchen and hugged me for a second longer than usual. She squeezed my hand once before she let go. Raymond nodded at me from across the room, that calm, solid nod. Patricia was at the dining table with a leather portfolio open in front of her, papers arranged neatly inside. Nadira was beside her with a calculator and her own folders, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Fletcher looked at the table. Something shifted in his face, small, just a flicker, like a man who has walked into a room and gotten the geometry wrong. "What's all this?" he said. "Sit down, Fletcher," I said. He looked at me. He looked at Patricia. He looked at Nadira, whom he knew and had always been slightly dismissive of, because she was quiet and methodical and those qualities didn't register to him as intelligence. "Sweetheart, what's going on? Who are these people?" "Patricia is my attorney," I said. "Nadira you know. She's been helping me verify some financial records over the past several weeks." I sat down across from him. "We need to talk about Harwick Crest Holdings." The room did not get louder. It got very, very still. Fletcher's jaw didn't drop. He wasn't that expressive. But I watched something move behind his eyes. A rapid recalculation, the look of a man trying to determine how much I knew and whether there was still a version of this he could manage. "That's a business investment," he said. "I told you about that. You didn't," I said. "I have every email either of us sent in the last 2 years. You didn't tell me about it." It was something I was still developing. I was going to... "Fletcher," I said it quietly. "The Carolina property was transferred to Harwick Crest Holdings in December of last year. That property was a marital asset. My name was not on the original deed due to a closing error that you knew about and did not correct. Patricia has the documentation." He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked back at him with the steady, level expression of a woman who has had this exact conversation many times, and has never once been surprised by what came next. "I'd like to speak to my own attorney," Fletcher said. "You're welcome to," Patricia said. "I'd encourage it. But the filing has already been initiated. The petition was submitted this morning. The asset freeze request is part of that filing, which means Harwick Crest Holdings and its associated accounts are now subject to discovery." I watched him process that. I watched him do the math in real time, the same math I had done 5 weeks ago, except I had 5 weeks of preparation and he had approximately 90 seconds. "You're filing for divorce," he said. "Yes," I said. "Tonight? At Constance's house?" His voice shifted slightly, something almost contemptuous in it. "This is how you wanted to do this. And that is the moment I want you to understand. Because it mattered to me. Not in a vindictive way, or maybe a little bit in a vindictive way, I won't pretend otherwise. But mostly because he deserved to have someone look him in the eye and say it plainly in a room full of witnesses. You moved our assets into a company I didn't know existed, I said. You did it for 1.5 years, while I was in this marriage believing we were building something together. You were building an exit, one that was designed to leave me without the financial footing to fight it. I paused. I just decided to finish building mine first. He didn't say anything for a moment. Constance was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. Raymond was by the window. Nadira was looking at her folder. Patricia was looking at Fletcher. I was looking at Fletcher. I made a mistake, he said finally. This wasn't supposed to go like this. Famous last words, Constance said quietly from the doorway. She didn't say it loudly. She said it the way you say something true when you've been holding it in for a while. Fletcher looked at her. Then he looked back at me. I want to fix this, he said. I know you do, I said. That's not an option right now. What happened after that was procedural. Fletcher called his attorney from Constance's driveway. Patricia walked him through what had already been filed and what the discovery process would look like. The asset freeze meant that Harwick Crest Holdings couldn't make any moves until the court had examined the transfers. Nadira had prepared a full accounting of the marital assets as they existed prior to the LLC's incorporation, which established a baseline the court would use. Fletcher signed an acknowledgement of service that night. The notary stamped it. He left Constance's house at 9:47 in the evening, still wearing the charcoal blazer I had bought him. He didn't say goodbye to me. He walked out the front door, and I watched through the window as his car pulled out of the driveway and the taillights disappeared around the corner. Constance put her arm around me and said nothing. I let her. I want to tell you what the weeks after were like, because I think the part that doesn't get talked about is that none of this is clean, even when you win, and I am going to tell you that I won. That the asset freeze held, that the fraudulent transfer of the Carolina property was reversed, that Harwick Crest Holdings was subject to full discovery, and the court found that Fletcher had deliberately routed marital funds through it over the course of 19 months. Even when all of that happens the way it's supposed to, the grief does not ask permission. It arrives on its own schedule. I cried in my car twice, once on the way to a court date in November in the parking garage for 11 minutes, once in February at the grocery store because I turned down an aisle and saw the brand of pasta we always bought together, and it hit me in a way I hadn't expected. And I stood there for a moment with my hand on my cart, feeling like an absolute fool. Grief doesn't care that you were right. It doesn't care that you had every document in order, and every attorney's call returned promptly, and every asset properly identified and logged. It just shows up in a grocery store aisle and reminds you that this was your life, and now it isn't, and something in you still misses the version of it that you thought you had. I called Patricia on a Tuesday in January because I needed to ask her a procedural question about a document, and when she picked up, I started crying before I even finished saying hello. She didn't rush me. She said, "Take a minute," and I did. You know what I didn't feel, standing in Constance's living room on October 14th? Small. I had not felt small in that room, with that man, in front of those witnesses, and that mattered to me in a way I am still unpacking, because I had felt small in small ways for years. Not dramatically, nothing so obvious that I could have pointed to it. But in the way, he talked about my work as something I did to keep busy. In the way he would half listen to what I said at dinner, and then repeat it back incorrectly later, as if I'd said something simpler than I had. In the way he had looked at the filing cabinet, I realize now, and thought about the fact that I had a key to it, and had decided I wouldn't know what to do with what was inside. He was wrong about that from the beginning. There is a particular kind of mistake that men make about quiet women. They see the quiet and they think absence. They think the silence is where the substance is missing. They don't understand that some of us are quiet because we are listening, and that listening, done carefully enough and long enough, is how you find out everything you need to know. I found out everything I needed to know. The settlement was finalized in April. I won't give you every number because some of it is still under terms of a confidentiality clause that Patricia advised I maintain. What I will tell you is that I left my marriage with more than I came in with, which is what should happen when you have spent 11 years contributing to something and someone spent the last 19 months trying to quietly remove you from it. The Carolina property came back to me. It is sitting in my name now, in a file folder in my home office. My home office in the house I moved into in March, which is smaller than the one I left, but has a window in the kitchen that faces east and gets the morning light in a way that I have not stopped being grateful for. I had coffee there this morning. I had it alone, which I have stopped experiencing as a sad thing. Constance came over for dinner last Saturday. Nadira drove up from Macon. We ordered food and sat on the back porch until after 11 and talked about everything and nothing, the way you do with people who have stood next to you in a room and not looked away. Fletcher has moved somewhere in the North Atlanta suburbs. I don't know more than that, and I have made a deliberate choice not to find out more. Patricia tells me what I need to know when I need to know it, and otherwise I have learned to let the parts of the story that don't require my attention go on existing without me. What I think about sometimes is the version of me in the hallway in March, the one who stood at the open filing cabinet for a moment and almost kept walking. I think about what would have happened if she had. I think about the agreement Fletcher would have eventually presented me with, the one that would have come after he'd finished moving the pieces into the positions he wanted. I think about how I might have sat across from some attorney I'd found last minute and listened to her say that the assets had been properly transferred and the property wasn't in my name and there wasn't much to be done. I think about that woman, and I feel something for her. Compassion, mostly. A kind of protection I am grateful I was able to offer her, from myself in a hallway on a Tuesday in March. I didn't keep walking. I went in. And I closed the box quietly when I was done, and I went back to the couch, and I picked up my tea, and I thought about who I was going to have to become, to protect who I had always been. It turns out she was someone I already knew.